Okay, hello everyone. Thank you for joining us. This is the first of 8 weeks of a speaker series where we are talking about real issues that our courts are facing. And we are doing this with candidates who are running for office and are ready to tackle these issues in our courts. And so today we have Giuseppe Rosselli, who is running for Court of Common Pleas, and we have Hilary Taylor, who's running for the Magistrate's Office of Dormont and Mount Lebanon. And I have with me here Stephanie Myers, who is the chair of Mount Lebanon Organization for Racial Equity, and I am Hilary Bendick. I am part of Grassroots Justice of South Hills. So we are so happy to have everybody here for this speaker series. And this title of this one is called, Why Are So Many People in Our Jails? So we're going to start with some introductions, and then we are going to jump right into these issues. So Giuseppe, I'll start with you because you are at the top of our little candidate box. So why don't you tell us a little bit about you?
Sure. My name is Giuseppe Rosselli. I'm running for Court of Common Pleas of Allegheny County. I'm a criminal defense attorney for the past 21 years at this point. I'm a trial lawyer, which means I've tried every case from disorderly conduct to homicides. That includes multiple jury trials. I'm running because I believe this is an opportunity for us to bring some balance to the criminal justice system specifically. Right now, we have an opportunity with 9 seats open. So that means these 9 seats are going to be filled with new judges. And if we fill those seats with the right people, we can actually start the process of changing a system that has historically disenfranchised and destroyed communities of the marginalized. So that's why I'm here, and I look forward to answering all your questions. Thank you for having me.
Great, thank you. All right, Hilary Wheatley Taylor, why don't you give us a little introduction about you and why you're here?
All right, I am one of 2 Hilarys on screen tonight. I'm the candidate. I am a Mount Lebanon resident who has been a civil litigator for 18 years. So I have tried cases in the civil division since I started practicing, and have spent a good bit of time before magistrates on landlord tenant and general civil litigation and code enforcement matters. And I'm running because I have seen the disparities in the civil division as it relates to magistrates in our courts, and have come to learn and understand what an impact our magistrates have on the populations in jail, and the disparate treatment of our marginalized community on the criminal side. And I'm ready to be part of the reform from the local level.
Great. Okay, so what we're going to do is we're going to go through some questions that we have put together, our 2 organizations, MORE and Grassroots Justice, and then we will open up questions to the audience at the end. So if you have any questions, you can put them in the chat. And you feel free to put them in throughout. We'll go back to them at the end, but we're going to start with the questions our 2 organizations have kind of put together through the candidates. So what I'm going to start with is, Elaine, if you can put up for me the first PowerPoint. When we do these series, we always like to just kind of start with some background for everybody, so you kind of just have some basic facts before getting into the hard stuff. So, kind of looking at an overview of the jail population at ACJ. We have here at our jail, and this is from the Allegheny Analytics website here, on average from January 1st, 2019 through March 19th, 2021, Allegheny County Jail held on average 2,169 individuals each day. You can see, looking at the chart, when COVID hit, by efforts to reduce the jail population during that time, there was a decline. obviously, in the jail population. But then it looks like the jail population did start then to go up again recently. Looking at the gender, 89% of the population is male, 11% female, 64% is Black, 35% white, 1% other race. Obviously, compared to the statistics on the actual population of the Pittsburgh area, there's a large difference in the actual percentage of the population of the Pittsburgh area and Allegheny County area. On the ages, 16% is between 18 and 24, 40% is between 25 and 34 years old, and 24% is between 35 and 44 years old, and 12% 45 to 54 years old, and then about 8%, in different ages is over 55. Thank you, Elaine. All right, so going to questions. So starting with you, Giuseppe, I'm just kind of giving some, again, keeping with some background. Other than being found guilty of a jailable crime, how do people end up at Allegheny County Jail?
So most of the people who are at Allegheny County Jail are either there because they can't afford to post bail, or they're in violation of probation, allegedly in violation of probation, and they are incarcerated pending a violation hearing. So that makes up the majority of inmates at the Allegheny County Jail.
Okay, and in terms of posting bail or certain bond conditions, what would be some problems somebody with mental health might face in terms of being unable to or ending up at Allegheny County Jail?
So, I mean, let's start with the obvious, and that is attaching one's financial ability to their freedom, and how just offensive that is on its face. I'm hesitant to say that we can solve all of these problems just through criminal justice reform, because the reality is what we see in the criminal justice system is just an extension of what's actually happening in society. So we can deal with the individual problems of the criminal justice system, and trust me when I say that process will be slow, but it has to start somewhere. When we talk about individuals who are dealing with mental health issues, there's a 2019 study from the University of Pittsburgh Politics Institute. Roughly 75% of all inmates at the Allegheny County Jail suffered from either a mental health diagnosis, either diagnosed or undiagnosed, or addiction. So those are the people that we are incarcerating, right? We're incarcerating those who are addicted, that we say on one side of our mouth is a disease, and on the other side of the mouth we give them a jail cell. The issues are that's the impasse point. Right there is the moment we can start addressing that individual offender's underlying contributing cause. And too often we don't. Too often they just sit in a jail cell and await their next court date, which oftentimes, many times, is 8, 9, 10 months, a year later. And the effect of that incarceration for any period of time, let alone a year, when you remove someone from the world for a year, means they're starting over. And that cycle just continues. It does not benefit the offender who is dealing with a mental health issue. I would suggest it makes it worse. It doesn't benefit the addict or someone who's dealing with active addiction. I suggest it makes it worse. So until we stop criminalizing addiction, until we stop criminalizing mental health diagnoses, we're going to continue doing the same exact things that we've been over the course of our history in the criminal justice system.
And isn't it true, Giuseppe, that a lot of the not only in Allegheny County, but our prisoners like nationwide, they're not committing crimes because they have mental health and addiction issues. The crimes are the symptoms of those issues, right? Like disorderly conduct and,
Sure.
resisting arrest and the sort of behavior that gets the police called on them.
Look, it's all intertwined,
Right.
right? And I'll go one step further. It's easy for us to say that someone who is dealing with a mental health episode and police are called that, we're not going to criminalize that behavior. We need to go one step further. We need to go one step further in the sense that even when there is a crime, we need to find a way to break the offender from the system, because the system doesn't help the offender, nor does it help the community as a whole. So the processes that we have in place right now are actively hurting our communities, even when there is an actual crime. If there's a theft and we know the individual who has committed the theft, but we also know that if our options are criminalize or not to criminalize. There are 4 steps, there are 4 checks of discretion. There's the beat cop, right? There's the cop who comes in and first interacts with the offender, and they have discretion. There's the magistrate, who the case is presented to for the first time and now has an option to use their discretion to benefit that individual's life in a positive way and accordingly benefit the community. There's the district attorney's office. I've stopped depending on the district attorney's office to use their discretion in a positive manner at this point. And then the last stop is the judge, right? So we've gone through all of these checks to do what not is only best for the law, but also what's best for our communities. And too often we go through those 4 checks and it's rubber stamped. Right. And we continue the cycle knowingly. We know what's happening when that person walks out of our courtroom with a conviction and a period of probation. We know they're coming back.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
What access do judges have to mental health professionals when deciding, how to handle defendants with, addiction issues or mental health issues?
So in Allegheny County, we actually have a pretty decent program, justice-related services, and they deal with both mental health diagnoses and active addiction. The problem is to get into a JRS plan, you have to have the diagnoses. If you're undiagnosed, it becomes difficult working through that program. And they actually have the resources that can benefit individuals, right? So they provide assistance with housing, they provide assistance with treatment, they provide assistance with counseling. And those are all great things. They make sure that you take your medication, all great things. The problem is you still go through that process convicted of a crime. You still go through that process wearing the scarlet letter of criminal. And when you can't get a job and you're restricted in where you can live, which means your children's education is now limited, when now food stability becomes an issue, all of the societal harms that we talk about are all intertwined. And oftentimes you can draw back and trace back to the criminal justice system as a significant contributing cause to that continued cycle.
It seems that would also, if you're required to have a diagnosis beforehand, would lead to income disparities and because those persons who might not have health insurance or,
all of it
be limited out.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, there are hurdles at every corner for the offender that you're describing. And that's assuming that they can actually post the monetary bond to get out to get the benefit of the JRS plan.
Mm-hmm.
Oftentimes.
Right. And the only way you get over that hurdle is with wealth. Right.
It's not the only way, but
I mean, You're right.
you know, it's what I'll say is people with money and with resources, they hear this conversation and they're confused because that's not the world that they live in.
Right.
Money definitely helps.
In terms of then jumping to sentencing,
Sure.
what leeway does a judge have in terms of the sentence imposed upon a defendant?
Complete discretion. I mean, there are certain crimes, murder in the first degree, murder of the second degree, that upon conviction call for a mandatory life sentence. That's another issue, but second degree murder shouldn't be a mandatory life sentence. If I don't want to get into that issue, I could for an hour, but that in and of itself is unfair, right? So outside of mandatory sentences, a judge has complete discretion. There are guidelines, and guidelines take into specific pieces of information to determine what that guideline range is. The first is one's prior record score, and the other is the offense gravity score as dictated or mandated by the state legislator. So if you're looking at a matrix, right, and matrix, at the top you have one's prior record score 1 to 5 with repeat felon. This is, we're dealing with essentially people of serious violent offenses, and then 1 to 14 on the offense gravity score, which is anywhere from a small amount of marijuana at 1 to murder at 14. And where those 2 points intersect is a range of sentence. So just how we calculate one's guideline range sentence doesn't take into account the implicit bias that we know that now exists over the course of that offender's entire lifetime. It also includes juvenile adjudications. So if you've been adjudicated in juvenile court, you may not have access, the world may not have access to that adjudication and see it, but the district attorney's office has access to it. And that's part of the calculation for one's prior record score. So I'm sorry.
Can I ask, to what degree do they have access to a juvenile record? Because that's very interesting to me.
I know that the adjudication is documented. So I know it's part of the calculation. So I'll sit down with a 21-year-old offender and, hey, Zep, I have no adult convictions. Well, what about in juvenile? Did you go through the juvenile court? Well, yeah. And we tell the story and we get the prior record score, and it's, we see that, the guidelines have now been elevated. So if young people are growing up in a community where that's being over policed, where rather than when getting in trouble being taken home to their parents, like I was when I was a kid, all right, and they're actually being prosecuted, we're starting to build that score. We're not protecting those children.
And I would think it would matter too. So we live in a school district where it's very common to just, shove disciplinary matters to the magistrate. And a lot of times their parents are convinced to accept a conviction or, accept, something, on your record, in exchange for, a fine or something. Does that come into play?
Every day. I mean, that's how the criminal justice system works. That's why there aren't jury trials every day. We'll give you your period of probation. I once had a young district attorney tell me in a disputed case, why won't your client take his felony? Just think about that for a second. Why? Because I said so. I'm not taking his felony. And I don't believe that individual person is a bad person. I don't believe that individual person is necessarily a bigot or a racist. But I also believe that individual DA is not in tune with the community that he's serving to understand why that's offensive. Because once that 21-year-old kid takes his felony, his life is ruined.
Yeah.
Yep. He's got to check the box on housing applications, job applications.
Every time.
Every single time.
I can speak to that. I had a cousin who had who still has a substance use disorder, and he started as a young man. And you know, when you're young, you're invincible, and you don't think that no one thinks they're going to become a person that has a substance use disorder. So, but this was in the 80s. You know that whole story, and he you know, subsequently became basically trapped in the criminal justice system. You know, he got a felony and no public housing. You know, you have to, like Hilary said, you have to check that box. Everything becomes difficult, everything. And it increases so much more stress on a person who already has difficulty dealing with stress. So it's really a setup. It's a setup.
100%. So let me finish that thought real quick. What DAs will do, and this isn't here in Allegheny County, this is everywhere, every county across America. We will give you the benefit of a soft landing spot on your sentence if you choose to plead guilty, but understand, if you don't, you're going to prison for a very long time. And 99% of the world says, okay, I'll take the deal, regardless of the strength of the evidence, because who wants to risk going to prison for a very long time?
Right. And all that, what that does in very simple terms is punish people for asserting their right to the presumption of innocence.
Correct. Now people who will play devil's advocate will say, well, acceptance of responsibility is a mitigating factor. You know, because you've accepted responsibility, I am comfortable giving you a lighter sentence. It's just wordplay. It is exactly what Hilary just said. It's punishing one's exercising of their constitutional rights.
So you had mentioned kind of the I'm doing the thing wrong, but with regard to sentencing your how they came together. Where does Pennsylvania stand in Allegheny County also with regard to the use of an algorithm when it comes to sentencing?
Okay, so let me go back real quick because I didn't finish the thought on how the matrix works.
Okay, matrix.
When you ask the question, what discretion does a judge have? As long as there's not a mandatory sentence, and as long as the judge is able to articulate a reason to deviate from the guideline range, either up or down, and then report that with the state commission, the state sentencing commission, you can sentence any individual for anything based on what you believe to be appropriate. The guidelines are only
Guidelines.
They're
mandatory,
advisory.
right? Yeah.
They're advisory. So the next question, I'm sorry, Hilary.
Where does Pennsylvania and Allegheny County stand with regard to the use of an algorithm?
So I'm unfamiliar of any algorithm that is used specifically for sentencing purposes, but there are equations that are used, and they'll call them risk assessments, to determine what an appropriate bail is and justify a monetary bail based on an algorithm or an equation of some sort. I don't know of any algorithm that is used specifically in sentencing.
And so with regard to bail, what are the problems then with regard to setting bail based on an algorithm when it comes to like racial disparities and things like that?
All right, so each of these individual things, if you have a conversation with anybody who supports these processes or these institutions, what they'll say is, well, that's not racist. I mean, that's a mathematical equation, right? I mean, the problem is the numbers that they're putting into that equation, the factors that they're using to determine the answer to that equation was built on a racist infrastructure, on an infrastructure that does not care about the poor, does not care about the most vulnerable of our communities. Because if it did, they would understand that attaching financial ability to freedom is crazy talk. So So I think
Yeah,
that
I mean, the number, when you think about the algorithm, somebody inputs the data to teach the algorithm how to come up with a calculation right. And that data is inherently racist because of the inherent bias of all of the systems that go into creating the data, from the bias of the police officers and how they police and who they arrest, to the bias of the juries and who they convict, and the bias of the judges and how they sentence or determine someone's likelihood to commit another crime while out on bond.
correct.
None of that can be without bias if any part of the system is biased.
The answer to the question is only as good as the data that's being used. And if the data is corrupted, then the answer is corrupted.
Even if it's generated by a computer.
Even if.
Yep.
Okay. Elaine, are you able to put up PowerPoint number 2 for me, please?
Is that correct right there?
Maybe I needed. I'm sorry, maybe I needed 3, sorry. Oh, no, I did need 2, I'm sorry.
Is that good?
I might have actually needed 3, even though we said we were going to get rid of 3 to talk about the next one. Okay, looking at this chart, which is, it's a little hard to see. On here, it says that there are currently 1,796 individuals incarcerated, and 42% have more than one type of hold on them, and 58% have one hold on them. Giuseppe, can you explain first what a hold is, what a detainer hold is, and how somebody ends up with what a detainer hold on them?
So the hold is the detainer. So it's the thing that is standing in the way of the individual and their freedom. So
okay, and how much? Oh, sorry.
No,
Go
please.
ahead.
Please.
I was going to say, how much discretion then does a judge have with regard to the release of a detainer?
So there are 2 types of detainers. There's state parole and there's county probation. And as long as a judge has jurisdiction, which means that the case is a county probation case, the judge has complete discretion. State parole, that jurisdiction lies within the state parole board, and a judge can't. There's no avenue for a judge to touch that.
Okay, and how often is a person held when they are first brought in before they are brought to hearing to have their detainer lifted?
Sure, there's a due process called a Gagnon 1 hearing. Gagnon is the name of the case that brought this due process right to those who are held on a probation violation. That should happen within 10 days. The reality is that most often it's already been predetermined. The presentation of evidence is limited. Not to mention, if the offender has counsel, you're limited in what you can say, because if there's a new criminal charge, I'm suggesting you exercise your right to remain silent. So you sit there in silence and let a probation officer and or a judge make a determination that they're going to hold you for a period of time. That period of time could be as quick as finding suitable housing, maybe an alternative housing facility or on house arrest. That happens, but I still view that supervision offensive on many levels. But it's a way out of the jail, at least. It could take as long as the final disposition of the case that caused the violation. So if you're on probation for case A, and while on probation, you're arrested at case B, that is a violation of your probation, not because you've been convicted of case B, but you've been arrested of case B. They have the authority at that point to incarcerate you. And many judges have a philosophy that they will not touch your detainer until final disposition of case B, which could take a year.
So if I understand things, otherwise non-jailable offense could end up causing you to be jailed for a significant period of time just because it occurred during a time you're on probation.
100%.
Okay.
And the time it takes to get to that Gagnon 1 hearing isn't any faster if it's a technical or a direct violation, right?
Nope. Based on the schedule of the hearing and probation officer and, the jail.
Right. And for the attendees, the difference is a technical violation is things like what, failure to appear,
Correct.
you failed a drug test, things like
Correct.
that. Whereas
Correct.
a direct violation is you've been charged with a new crime.
Correct.
Are there opportunities in this, are there opportunities for judges to release defendants who get arrested in that situation?
Every day.
So should we be listening to, certain candidates who, are talking about, how inappropriate these arrests are?
You broke up there, Hilary. I only caught the beginning.
Oh.
One more time.
Sorry. In terms of things, we should be listening to, if we find these arrests, offensive, should we be listening for candidates to be talking about, how inappropriate these arrests or, these long jail sentences are?
So it's not necessarily the arrest that is offensive.
I'm sorry, not the rest, the jail time.
Right. Sure. So yeah, without question. When I say these things, I often find that most people don't understand the process. And because they don't understand the process, it's never really occurred to them how offensive it is. But once they hear it and understand what this process actually is, there's only, for me at least, there's only one way to walk away from that conversation is we need to do something different.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm of the opinion that the presumption of innocence is a real thing.
Mm-hmm.
Right? So when one is arrested, that's just an allegation. There's been no evidence presented. There's been no trial. There's been no disposition of guilt. It's just an allegation.
Right.
We're incarcerating people for a very long time based on allegations without the benefit of conviction, all on this concept of, these people need to be supervised and on probation. Let me give you one real quick statistic. In Allegheny County specifically, the average length of supervision is 42 months. Okay, that's 30 months on misdemeanors of supervision. So 2.5 years of supervision for a misdemeanor, that's the average. 5 years of supervision, 60 months for a felony. Nationally, that number is 22 months. We are almost double the amount of supervision time. And what you have to understand is every time that you violate, your probation sentence is revoked and you're resentenced up to the statutory maximum.
Mm-hmm.
Does that make sense? So probation never ends, it just continues. And there are generally no resources behind this period of probation that help people build. We spend, of our Allegheny County taxes, 42% of which goes to the criminal justice system. Now, that's not the city. That's not including the city. That's not including the state or the feds. That's county. 42% to the criminal justice system. 80 million of which each year goes to the Allegheny County Jail. Do you know what we can do with just a portion of that in some of these communities, with some of these people who come through our system? I'd much rather invest in people than institutions. And right now we are fully funding the institution of incarceration and supervision.
Yeah, I mean, and when you just look at the jail in and of itself, it's hard to imagine how we're spending $80 million there. They're not mowing any grass for the inmates to have an opportunity to go out and walk around, let alone, take care of them while they're in the cells. I mean, it's astounding. And then, and the percent, what's the percentage, Giuseppe, of people there who haven't even been convicted? Isn't it somewhere in the 90%, right?
I'm not sure of the exact number, but my belief is somewhere in the 80%.
Yeah, in fact, I got a number today.
Mhm.
There are 48 people in jail right now currently serving a county sentence. 48. Everybody else is there because of a detainer or because they can't meet their bail conditions.
Now, if you don't hear that number, and if your impulse isn't to demand something better after hearing that number, I don't know what's going to convince you. It's, we talk about the system being broken. I don't believe the system's broken. I believe the system is working exactly like it was supposed to.
As designed.
Yep. So, until we actually, and this is an important concept I want people to understand. I'm not suggesting that the judges currently on the bench are bigoted or racist. I know many of them, and I believe that not to be true. But what it does mean is the line of impartiality that we've drawn, that these judges have determined is what's fair in any given case, what is impartial, that line of impartiality has been drawn in the wrong place from the beginning of our existence in this country. The judges aren't getting close to what is actually fair, what is actually impartial, and the statistics bear that out. You don't have to take my word for it. Read a book. We know what's happening. We just haven't motivated ourselves as citizens to put the right people in those positions to start the change. And this change is generational. It doesn't change by putting me or any other judge on the bench. This change is for our kids, not us. We got a lot of work to do just to make this look fair by the time that my children are adults.
I just did the math. It's 97% of the Allegheny County Jail is there not having been convicted of a crime.
Giuseppe, going back to the question of probation, what can we do to reform probation to reduce the high levels of incarceration we see at the Allegheny County Jail?
Sure.
What is some reform suggestions?
So the first is stop putting these long tails. I call them tails. You get your sentence, and you get a probation tail that follows. If there are judges right now who, if you're convicted of a felony and you get sentenced to 2.5 to 5 years in a state prison facility and you get released after 2.5 years, the state parole board, state probation is now responsible for your supervision. We have judges who will add 5 years of county supervised supervision after that. Why?
Yeah, to what end?
To what end? It never ends. It never ends.
Mm-hmm.
So we can start there. Just stop doing it. Stop putting people in positions who think that that's okay. That's the first piece. The second piece is use the opportunity of offenders coming in through the system. Use that as an opportunity to help build that offender up so that they're less likely to offend.
Mm-hmm.
Right? We have programs in Allegheny County that are wonderful programs. We call them diversion courts, right? And some of you may understand what they are and how they work, but the general idea is the judges have figured out or have determined that there are underlying contributing causes to criminal behavior. And because there are these underlying contributing causes, we don't want those offenders to go through the system just on a normal docket, right? So we have mental health court, great program run by Judge Lazaro. We have DUI court, deals with alcoholism. We have post-traumatic stress in veterans court. So veterans court, we deal with the post-traumatic stress of being in active duty. And the last one is veterans court. I'm drawing a blank on the last one. But the point is, these programs they understand that the offenders are coming into our courts with an underlying contributing cause. And that underlying contributing cause is significant enough, at least in the judge's mind, that we're going to treat them differently. We're going to provide them resources, which means most people who go through the general docket don't get those resources, right? But what we fail to either accept, own, however you want to describe it, is that the greatest contributing cause to criminal behavior is poverty. It's lack of opportunity, right? So the first thing we need to do with our diversion courts is expand who is eligible for them, right? The second thing, to get into one of these diversion courts, it means that your next step is jail. So we're going to divert you not from the conviction, we're going to divert you from the jail sentence, which means you've been through the system 3, 4, 5 times. And each of those times a missed opportunity occurred to provide the resources needed to correct the behavior or to assist in correcting behavior. So we need to start sooner. Why isn't that the first step? The last step is if you're going to work a program for 2 years with judicial oversight that is on a monthly basis where you come in and you speak to the judge, why are we letting those individuals who have worked that program and have paid back their debt walk out of that courtroom with a conviction? Because the conviction is going to create the same social harm that we're trying to avoid from sentencing someone to jail.
Yeah, what's the point of that 2 years of programming?
Control.
If at the end of it they still walk away with a conviction that's on their record.
Right, and I don't want to minimize those programs are effective. They're good programs, but they can be so much better.
Yeah, especially.
I'm sorry. Go ahead, Hilary.
No, go ahead, Stephanie. Go ahead.
Can some of these programs be applied pre-trial? I don't know if you mentioned that, but I know you were talking about you kind of have to go through the system to get to these alternative programs. So none of these things can be applied pre-trial. I see you have a problem. We're going to do this for you instead of, you going through the system. That just doesn't happen, or it's just very infrequent.
Oh, it happens all the time in the suburbs.
Okay.
Right? It happens all the time where we're gonna take you home. We're gonna have a strong talking to your parents, make sure they understand what's going on, and you're gonna get this right or else, right? It happens all the time. Take that same situation, and it occurs in the Hill District. It occurs in Homewood. There's no room there. That's going through the process. See, I believe magistrates have amazing discretion. And I believe if they work closely with their police department, they can coordinate programs that deal with most cases at the magisterial level. The problem is oftentimes magistrates are extensions of not only the district attorney, but also the police, the police in their community. So it becomes a rubber stamp.
Right. Especially when we elect magistrates who are former cops or former DAs. They can't help but be on the same team.
It contributes for certain.
You mentioned kids and parents, and that leads me to one of the questions about the youth incarceration. If Elaine, can you go to chart number PowerPoint number 2? I think it's on PowerPoint number 2, or maybe on number 1. I can't remember now. I think it's number 1 actually, Elaine. PowerPoint number 1.
Yeah, it's number 1.
Yes, number 1. Yeah, if you look at this chart, and I think Hilary went over, can you go back to number 1, Elaine? Sorry about that. Yeah, if you look at this chart under age, the biggest group of incarcerated individuals are in that second group, 25 to 34. A lot of people in their 20s are incarcerated. What can we do to stop incarcerating so many youth? What changes can be made at the magisterial level? Anyone who wants to answer.
Would you like to answer that, Hilary? You'd like me to jump in?
Why don't you go ahead and then I'll add some thoughts.
Right. So the first thing is elect people who have a will to not only serve their community, but understanding the people who come before them as offenders are part of that community. Right. So that's the first thing. In terms of that demographic specifically, I want each of you to understand the cost that 40% of 25 and 34-year-olds who are not part of the community, working, paying taxes, doing their community participation, what that cost is on us as taxpayers.
Right.
See, when someone can't work, when someone can't get the best education available to them, when someone is more concerned about their next meal, that entire cost falls back on us as taxpayers. And as taxpayers, I am so confused as to why we accept a product that is this efficient and this ineffective.
Oh.
And we do that because we don't care about the people that it is affecting most. We've made the deal with the devil to accept that cost based on some misguided belief that somehow makes me safe. We
Right.
can't jail our way out of this process.
Right.
The people that
And
make up that 25 to 34% are people who are dealing with substance abuse disorders, who are dealing with mental health disorders, who prior to getting into this race, I spoke with drug and alcohol experts to determine whether or not there were enough beds available in Allegheny County to clear the jail of all offenders dealing with the substance abuse issue. The answer is yes. We're choosing to do this.
Because it's easy. It's the easy, lazy choice, right?
Not only is it easy, but it gets people elected. The things that I say make it more
Yeah.
difficult for me to be elected.
Yeah.
Right? It's easy. People don't believe that charts like this actually touch their lives. It does. You may not see it, you may not feel it, but it absolutely touches your life. We're paying for it.
Yeah. Yeah, I think that, when you look at that age range and you realize that of all of those percentages, less than 50 people have been convicted of a crime. It's just astounding to think how many young people are starting their lives with 1 to 10-day periods in jail because of heartless, inconsiderate, irrational bail decisions made by magistrates. Right?
Yes.
It starts there and then it just snowballs. Even if they're given a bail that they can somehow, get the money together to pay, it takes them several days. They lose their ability to go to work. They lose their job. Their family falls apart. And then it just starts the cycle of arrest, hearing, time in jail over and over and over again in this continuing cycle.
It never ends.
My understanding, Hilary, is that you do have resources available to you in the magistrate's court, such as you can contact social workers in the community and things like that to help try to avoid incarceration. Things like that might be you're not sentencing so much, but correct?
Yeah. And I think what it takes is the will of a magistrate to do more than just rubber stamp the recommendation of a district attorney and send it to Allegheny County, right? Or, to just take the word of the police officer and let the police officer and the DA work it out downtown. That doesn't serve the entire system at all. It's a huge disservice to the system for magistrates to just make the easy choice of continuing it up to county or sending it up to county and letting Giuseppe or his colleagues someday deal with it there. The snowball of that's why it takes 9, 12 months for cases to get to trial, because there are too many of them there to begin with. And that starts with the decisions that magistrates make.
Magistrates have such an opportunity to take a huge chunk of how do I want to say this? If magistrates would be creative in process and view the offender as part of the community and provide the resources needed at that early stage with an opportunity for the case not to make it downtown, we solve a lot of problems. See, the issue is when that case goes downtown, now we get into that conflict between, do I want to risk prison or do I want to accept a deal?
There's a couple of questions about what the magistrates and the judge can do specifically to improve issues with bias and like specific changes. What specific changes? I know one of the things that Hilary said is not letting the DA kind of take over and using your discretion. Can you speak to some specific changes or that you could enact to improve? One of the questions was, in the absence of statutory or legislative change, what specific changes could the magistrate or a judge in the Court of Common Pleas do to help defendants?
I think that one big change and one role magistrates ought to start playing is dealing with the overcharging of defendants. And instead of, like the term I used earlier, rubber stamping the charges of the district attorney, holding them to their burden to prove each crime they've charged, instead of just piling on. Because when you pile on, what that gets you is the higher offense score in that sentencing matrix down the line, and the longer probation sentence or the state prison sentence instead of the county prison sentence. It should be obvious that someone who is sentenced to a state prison sentence and has to go serve that away, it just is harder for them to ever reintegrate into their life. And it all starts with the overcharging by the district attorneys and the police officers, with the cases that come before the magistrate.
So let's talk about the overcharging real quick. The overcharging is actually a bargaining chip on the district attorney, for the district attorney and the police officers. They overcharge because they're going to come into court and say, I'll drop this charge if you waive the rest of the charges downtown. The way that the system works, it is the best way I can describe it is any individual judge is going to be limited within their room, right? So, when you're electing a judge, you're making the determination is this person someone who understands the system on a level that they are not going to do the things that we're talking about here today, right? But that only fixes one room. How do we make change systemically? And the best answer I can give to this group is, once I put on that robe, I now have access to sentencing committees. I now have access to rules committees. I now have access to the table where decisions are being made. And quite frankly, the stuff that I'm talking about, I don't believe it's being discussed the way it needs to be discussed in those rooms when those decisions are being made. So when I say this is a long-term fix, this is generational. It's going to take a lot of time and a lot of hard work. So, but it starts May 18th.
Yeah,
that's where it starts.
Yeah, and a lot of this does, we can't wait on Harrisburg to fix the statutes and enact criminal justice reform. We know for certain that the District Attorneys Association, which is the lobbying group on behalf of the district attorneys, is a huge roadblock to criminal justice reform in Harrisburg. And so, we gotta make an end around the legislature and do it within the discretion that judges have already existing and in place. And if they would just use it in a better, more compassionate way, we don't need to wait for Harrisburg.
Look, and we need to understand there are people within our community who are who have earned their supervision, who have earned their jail sentence. But we've mastered that. We know how to incarcerate people. I don't think we need to talk about that. That's why I'm not focused on it. We know how to do that. We are far less capable of finding compassion and doing what's best for the community as a whole. And that's where my focus is, because that part of the conversation has been missing for a very long time.
I'm probably the oldest person on this panel, but I remember back when I really started paying attention to the news that there seemed to be a shift that occurred. And you can almost kind of point to it where there was a lot of talk, going back to the discussion about mental health, but we used to deal with the challenges of mental health in different ways. We used to have hospitals and doctors. Now, I wasn't always perfect, and there's some pretty famous cases, but there was a point in time where there's a lot more social supports for different things. And someone in the chat said that we need a biopsychosocial approach to these challenges rather than a moral one. So it seemed that there was a shift, like all of these social supports were gotten rid of. And of course, if you have the resources, you can still avail yourself to these things. But if you didn't, then a lot of these challenges seem to shift towards the criminal justice system, and things that we used to deal with doctors and kind of a multi-pronged approach just start to be dealt with like with just a hammer of the criminal justice system.
And Stephanie, I think a lot of that comes from our local officials and how they make budget decisions. You know, we shifted the budget to this law and order, war on drugs priority. And the money had to come from somewhere unless we were going to start raising everybody's municipal taxes, right? And so the shift went from those sort of social services, resources, you know, feel good, take care of people, do the right thing for our neighbors, resources, to let's militarize our police officers, let's add more cops to the force, let's, you know, add more probation officers. And, you know, and I think, you know, we, in addition to paying attention this year to the election and getting the right people on the bench, we all ought to have come to learn that who we elect on our municipal governments matters, because they decide how our money is spent.
Correct.
Yes,
You're right.
You mentioned about the policing, and there was a question in the chat, and going back to the youth incarceration rate, Alyssa Snyder asked, do you think community policing would afford city kids those same privileges as suburban kids?
Well, listen, you know, unfortunately, I just read a news article today about, you know, some of our suburban neighborhood police officers engaging in conversation that goes to the heart, and not of implicit bias, but explicit bias, right? Mm-hmm. So, you know, I don't want to suggest that it's perfect in the suburbs. The reality for me is it's not them versus us. Police are part of our community. Offenders are part of our community. Until that, I'm still optimistic to believe that those two things can coexist in harmony. I really do believe it, but it requires an acknowledgement from those who wield the power that what they've been doing is wrong. What they've been doing has been counterproductive to what's best for our communities as a whole. The problem is that's attached to jobs, right? So we've created an economic infrastructure that is dependent upon the incarceration and the supervision of our own citizens. Do I believe it can? Yes. But it's going to take a lot of time. None of this is fixed overnight. This is our history as a country. This isn't Allegheny County in 2021. I mean, this is who we are. This is how we built this thing. Mm-hmm. So
yeah, the system isn't broken, right? It's working exactly as it was designed to benefit those in power.
So it's if we can get this right, we can take a very big first step to putting ourselves in a position where we can address this and fix it. But I believe community policing is part of it. I do.
Kind of pivoting a little bit to another issue, the issue of COVID, which is on, of course, always in the back of our minds. In a prior forum that we did, I believe it was last week or 2 weeks ago, Judge Kim Berkeley Clark indicated that as a result of the changes made in COVID, in November of 2020, Allegheny County was incarcerating 23% fewer people in March 2020, just before COVID hit. Do you think there are any lessons that can be learned from how the courts and jails have handled things regarding COVID?
Sure.
Yeah.
Two. You have two lessons. One, the world doesn't end because there are more people who were in jail on Monday are now out of jail on Tuesday. We keep going on, right? We've seen no real uptick from that process. But two, and I think your statistics indicate this. I could be wrong, but recently we're going back up, right? So if we leave the criminal justice system without checks, if we leave them to their own, if we leave them do as they please, they will run over our communities. They will fill that jail back up to capacity the moment they can.
You know, in that same forum, I wanted to get your thoughts on this. Judge Clark mentioned that during that same period, even though the overall population of the ACJ, the Allegheny County Jail, went down because of them, releasing people because of COVID, the percentage of Black people incarcerated in the ACJ increased. What are your thoughts on why that occurred? And why were the Blacks going in at a time when officials were actually clearing out the jails to reduce risk from COVID? What are your thoughts on why that was occurring?
It's a difficult question. I have an opinion, but it's not based on facts, so I'm a little hesitant to share it. But the reality is it's just an extension of a system that we know to exist, right? It just highlights what we've been talking about for the last hour. When there's an opportunity to disenfranchise, when there's an opportunity to, and this isn't necessarily intentional, right? This isn't an officer saying, I am biased and therefore I am going to do this that's going to hurt you in your community. It's just how we police in 2021. It's just how we administer justice in 2021. And it's just a natural byproduct of a system that we've dealt with over the course of our history. It's the same story, different day.
Yeah.
I will note that I did hear Councilperson Hallam say in a forum that President Clark had said in a public forum that she states that we are no less safe with the jail population going down. And so that was a quote by Councilperson Hallam, Bethany Hallam, quoting President Clark. So
yeah,
that we learned we are no less safe with the lower jail population. So
yeah. That's absolutely true. I mean, and that bears out from who we know is in jail. People aren't in jail because they've been convicted of a crime. They're in jail because they have been brought in on detainers for probation violations, which could be as simple as failing to appear for a check-in. They're not dangerous. They're not out there making our communities less safe.
I have someone currently incarcerated because he and his girlfriend went on vacation to Miami. No new crime. He's been incarcerated for over 2 weeks, lost his job. So whatever infrastructure he built, it's now lost, all because you didn't follow my rules. This heavy hand of paternalistic, you're going to do as I say.
Yeah, I mean, not all the time, but, a handful of clients will come in, having been incarcerated, lost custody of their kids. Has absolutely nothing to do with their parenting. But then you're, having to climb back and, trying to get their custody rights back. And so they've lost that, family structure. because they, were incarcerated due to a probation violation that has nothing to do with, the initial crime, and, it's just something ridiculous, and the parent doesn't, truthfully care about it, but, it's just created this, windfall of problems for them.
Yeah.
We had another question in the chat. Alyssa Snyder wants to know, can the candidates please speak to their opinions of LEAD, L-E-A-D, law enforcement assisted diversion, and the impact on sex workers?
Yeah, so that's not something I'm completely familiar with in terms of the LEAD. But if I understand based on the other sort of pieces of that question, it's essentially understanding that someone who is in court for an allegation of a sex offense has a story that is probably as awful as any of us have heard, at least today, but probably for a very long time. And it's the understanding that we should not be criminalizing people who find themselves in that position, and we should find a way to divert them from the system. And I think I've been consistent from the beginning, from the time that we've started this conversation. I think we should divert as many people from the criminal justice system as we possibly can.
It's just another example of criminalization of poverty, right?
Mm-hmm. Yes, it's we've normalized supervision, we've normalized incarceration. If you talk to your average citizen and you say, this person has been incarcerated for, they did this, and this person has been incarcerated for it, the general response oftentimes is, well, if you don't want to do the time, don't do the crime. And that's just such a simplistic way to understand why people find themselves in the positions that they are. Simply because you, average citizen, have the privilege of not having to deal with those stressors and a life that leads one to the criminal justice system, doesn't mean that they don't exist, and that some people truly do struggle with their reality.
Yeah.
I've been reading the book Cast. I heard the name of the author escapes me right now, but she was talking about manufacturing consent. She was talking about that, and going back on the little conversation about the defunding of a lot of social programs, and how would you justify that? And a lot of it was morality. Morality was used to justify that. We have to keep our society safe. We have to keep our society pure. There was lots of those types of arguments. And one of the things that she talks about is this cultural hegemony, where, people manufacture your consent by making things seem like common sense. It's just common sense. You don't do the crime if you can't do the crime. It's just common sense.
It's common sense.
So then this panel has shown that under close examination, a lot of these things really don't make sense. It don't make sense at all. They're costing society. And instead of helping society, they're costing society. But people want simple solutions, and they also want to feel good about maybe the fact that they're not doing anything to help society. So these pithy sayings, make people feel good, and they consent to them. But on close examination, it just doesn't hold up.
It goes back to this concept that in the last 4 years really highlighted this concept. Everybody has picked a team, right? Nobody is comfortable in having difficult conversations. And that's unfortunate, because if we can't talk about these issues and talk about them in a factual sense, then we can't fix them. We just can't. The statistics that have been discussed tonight make it clear that there is a problem that needs addressed. But the reality is, half of our country could watch this podcast or this live stream and walk away from it saying, well, those four are full of it. They don't know what they're talking about.
We're the
we're-
downfall of America, aren't we?
We're still fighting just we're fighting about whether or not this is real on many, in many regards.
Right. I mean, when the conversation is, when we're still having to fight about whether or not policing is inherently biased
Correct.
and the statistics coming out of it, like, we can't even agree on basic facts.
Correct.
And if we can't agree on basic facts, we cannot, as a country, come up with a solution.
Exactly.
Mhm.
So we need to be able to have difficult conversations.
Yeah. Yeah.
All right, I think we've answered all the questions in the chat then, correct? Okay, well, thank you, both of you. So, but at this point, we want to make sure that you guys, we help you. So what do you have coming up, Giuseppe? I think I saw some sort of meet and greet. So tell us what you have coming up.
So on Sunday, the 28th, there is an online Zoom meet and greet. Everyone is invited. I'm a very small campaign. So for me, it's about getting in front of people and having them hear me speak. And I'm confident once, that process occurs, my team will continue to build.
Mhm.
But it's an online meet and greet. You can find details on the Rosselli for Judge Facebook page.
Which we're going to be putting up, we're going to be putting up, I think, your website. We're going to be putting the link here in a second. Our tech department is on it.
Tech department.
Done a great job. So yeah, it's a free event. There's going to be a lot of wonderful people there. Many leaders within the community who have shown their support for not only me, but my message. And that's the most important thing. We went through this process, not being a politician, not paying for a single signature through the petition signing process, and over tripled our numbers.
People pay for signatures?
Oh, for certain.
Oh, boy.
For certain.
Learn something new every day.
Yep. So we didn't engage in any of that, and the support that I've garnered has been purely based on my message. And for someone who speaks for a living, there's no greater compliment. So please join us. Everybody's invited. I hope to see everybody there. Let's fill that room and let's actually start making the steps we need to make to fix the problems that we've addressed here tonight.
Okay. Obviously, there is his website in the chat. And Hilary, what do you have coming up? What are your needs? How can we help you? I see your website's also in there.
We're out on the doors, knocking doors, COVID safe, knocking doors. And that's really, from a local level where the universe is smaller. That's the way we get our name out. Canvassing. So on Saturdays and Sundays, every weekend, except for Easter Sunday, we'll be out canvassing in Mount Lebanon and Dormont, rotating back and forth. And I think, do we still have an active sign up genius for that?
I believe on the website there is.
Okay. Yeah. So there's ways to canvass on the weekends, or if you want to canvass on your own and get a list of doors to knock, we can get you a list and you can do it on your own time. And we've got some Zoom meet and greets coming up that we just need to finalize, and we'll get details for dates on those on the website soon.
Just
All right, so
coming up on April the 1st.
Yeah, April the 1st.
That's the first one coming up.
Yep.
All right, so if you were moved by these two candidates, go to their website, donate for them. These are expensive elections, volunteer to help them. And next week we will be back on Monday. I believe it's the 29th with Lisa Middleman and speaking for the Common Pleas, and Hilary Wheatley Taylor will be back. And the topic is the DA, police, and our courts. So look forward to seeing you then.
Thanks, everybody.
Take care, everyone.
Good to see you again, Giuseppe.
Likewise, Hilary. Good luck.
Thanks.